Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Mel and today we're going to go through 10 fantasy romances that I recommend. So in honor of Realm of the Readathon and your conqueror of BAYLE, I am going to be giving you 10 of my fantasy romance recommendations plus 2 honorable mentions that I feel like kind of everybody talks about. So I did want to mention them, but that's not going to be in the main part. I wish I had like a crown or a staff or something, but I have no props. I'm useless. So I'm wearing green. It's St. Patrick's Day when I'm filming this, so we're just gonna roll with it. So hopefully I will introduce you to a few fantasy romances that you have not read. I do have a lot that I read way back when, but they're more paranormal romance and I really honestly need to reread them before I recommend them. But I'm gonna stop rambling and let's go through these picks really quick. So the first one that I would recommend is not a fantasy romance really in the first book. The fantasy romance aspect picks up more, I think, in book 3 or so. But I also think you can count this one as a military fantasy in case you are watching this for Realm of the Readathon. If you're not, hopefully you still find this helpful. But that's Guild by Raven Kennedy. This is a very versatile book. I don't want to tell you that it will count for other teams, but if you do your research, it could count for other teams. It follows a girl named Arin who is completely made of gold. Everything but her teeth is gold. And she is the consort to King Midas. And one day he decides he is going to take over another kingdom and leaves and wants her to come and follow him. And her carriage gets taken over. She gets taken by pirates. Things just kind of spiral. This book does have a more fantastical element than just the everything King Midas touches is made of gold element, but I do feel like that's a little bit of a spoiler, so I'm not going to mention it. However, I did really enjoy this first book as a whole. It does take a little while to get going. Both books 1 and 2 are a little on the slower side in the beginning, but I think once you get moving throughout them, they are really good. They're super addictive, and this first one is very, very short. The next one is one that everybody has probably heard of before, and it's not one that I personally just loved, but I did enjoy it, and I think that it would also be a good starter for somebody that maybe is trying to get into fantasy romance, but you don't read a lot of romance, and so you want to kind of dip your toe in. And that is The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen. This one also could be considered a military fantasy, sort of, if we're stretching things. And this is set in a world where one kingdom has control of the bridge, and because they have control of the bridge, they kind of control all of the commerce that comes in and out of the realm, making them the richest kingdom. Laura is not part of the Bridge Kingdom. Her kingdom is very poor and they're just struggling to make ends meet. So her father, the king, decides to make a pact with the Bridge Kingdom and is basically giving them one of his daughters to marry their new king. And Laura has been chosen, but she's not going there just to marry him. She's going there to get intel, and if everything goes wrong, to kill him. So I enjoyed this one. It's got a pretty political subplot, which I did enjoy, but I just kind of wanted more from it overall. I do think it is a great starter book into fantasy romance, and if you haven't read it already, I highly recommend. So now I'm going to mention one that if you are following my co-host Becca from Becca in the Books, you've already heard about Shouted at the Rooftops, but I couldn't do this video without mentioning Fortuna Sworn by KJ Sutton. This is a fae sort of urban fantasy romance following our main character Fortuna, who is a nightmare. She can reach into your thoughts and bring forth your most fearsome dreams, nightmares, etc. And her brother has gone missing and she will do anything to find him and get him back. One day a fae walks into the bar that she works at and tells her that he knows where her brother is and he will tell her provided that she marries him. This first book is romantic, but there's not a lot of smut in the first one. You really have to continue on to get more of that. I have enjoyed the series a lot so far. It's not necessarily a 5-star series for me, but it is a ton of fun and I am very, very excited to get the 5th book in the series, hopefully at the end of the year. So again, if you're trying to get into fantasy romance and you do like a pretty heavy action plot-based fantasy, I think you might enjoy this one. So I realize that so far I have mentioned all indie fantasy romances, so we're just going to keep on that train. And I'm going to mention The Bargainer by Laura Thalassa. This is the bind up. This is not one book. This is 3 books plus a novella, so don't let it scare you. The first book in the series, I believe, is not Dark Harmony, is Rhapsodic. Yes, the first book in the series is called Rhapsodic, and it is about the Bargainer, a fae who will do pretty much anything you ask of him, provided that you owe him a favor. And Callie has called on him so many times that she has hundreds and hundreds of favors owed to the Bargainer, and he has now come back to collect. It is a fantasy romance, but again, this is one of those that does have a pretty heavy plot-based romance, so if you don't like fantasy romance or you're trying to get into it, I do think this is a good one. Be aware that it is a modern, slightly urban setting. We have 2 different settings, one that's very fantastical and one that is more urban, so just kind of know of that before going in. And what I believe is the last indie published is The Longing of Lone Wolves by Lana Pechekrik. I cannot say that name. I'm sorry. She is so sweet though, so hopefully she won't come at me for butchering her last name. This is the first in the Fae Guardian series. It's a pretty expansive series. I think they come in different trilogies, but they all span one big overarching plot. And the main point of this is the world has devolved and is now run by the Fae many, many, many years after the world that we know of. So it is a more fantastical setting. Rush is a Fae guardian who has been cursed, and he cannot touch anyone and he cannot be seen really by anyone. Clark is a human who has just woken up in this realm not knowing what is going on or where she landed, and she gets herself into some trouble pretty quickly that Rush has to pull her out of. Together they travel to the Order, I believe. Yes. Together they're going to travel to the Order to hopefully lift Rush's curse and for Clark to find out what the heck is going on, where she came from. I really enjoyed this one. I didn't think I was going to at first, but as we got further into the story, I just became more and more invested. I do think this has a very good plot. I think it has the potential to be a great romance, and I am very excited to continue on in the series. I do think each book follows a different main character, but as far as I can tell, the overarching plot is going to follow throughout all of the books, so I think they do need to be read in order. Just be mindful, I have only read the first one in the series, but the first one was a 4-star read for me. All right, so we are going to move on to 2 books that I read a very, very, very long time ago, but are 2 of my favorite series. The first one is Dark Lover by J.R. Ward. This is an urban fantasy romance following the Black Dagger Brotherhood, that is a brotherhood of vampires set in New York City. And I love this series. It is so freaking long. Like, let me see if I can, all of that right there, that's all the Black Dagger Brotherhood books that I own, but it's not even all of them. There are many, many, many books. I would say that the first 7 or 8 are pretty heavy on the romance and are very explicit, but as you go further, the more fantastical that they get and the less that the romance takes a front seat. This series overall follows the Black Dagger Brotherhood, and they are fighting against the Omega, which is sort of like a demon, and he has, well, basically minions that are running the streets of Caldwell, if I'm not mistaken, and pretty much trying to take over the world. But it is a very humorous, I found it very, very funny. J.R. Ward is hilarious in person and very, very sexy. So I do recommend this one. It's an older book, so it may have a few problematic word choices and themes. I don't really remember, but just be aware that I do think it was originally written in 2005, so something to kind of keep in mind. Same goes for Dark Fever by Carrie Marie Moning. This book is well loved. It is one of my favorite series. I'm not sure if that's just because of nostalgia or because it truly is a great series, but I have read it many, many times and absolutely love the first 5. So the first core series is top notch. After book 5, it starts, I was checking to make sure that it was actually the 5th book. After book 5, it kind of takes a little bit of a turn and it's not the main plot point anymore. And I kind of stopped after that. I do plan to continue at some point, but I'm kind of just waiting until she finishes all of them. This book follows Michaela, and she and her sister Alana live in Georgia. and Alana decides to go to college or school in Dublin, Ireland. And one day, Michaela has not heard from her and realizes that her sister's gone missing. So she drops everything, packs, and goes to Dublin to try to find her sister, only to get roped into a world of Seelie and unseelie fae that she realizes only she could see. I would say the romance subplot in this is one of those that is subtle for the first few books and then ramps up more toward the end. Jericho is one of my favorite characters. He is brooding, he is badass, and he takes no prisoners. I loved this series. It's so much fun, and it's a great time. It's a great time. Moving into a couple that I'm stretching just a teensy bit. The first one is Paybacks, a Witch by Lana Harper. This one is going to appeal to those of you, I think, that read more contemporary romance and more traditional style romance. It came out around the same time as the X-Hex, and I think if you read both of them together, the X-Hex does lean more on the contemporary romance side, whereas Paybacks, a Witch leans a little more into the fantastical side. This is a revenge story where Emmy has left her small town because a guy really did her dirty, and she decides to come back for this games that they're having to decide which family is going to rule the town for the next X number of years. And when she gets there, one of the girls says, "Hey, he screwed me over too. You want to get some revenge and help us out?" And so Emmy decides to group up with her best friend and one of the girls that she went to school with and get revenge on this guy. It does have a contest element that I really enjoyed. It is sapphic, which I also really enjoyed, but I will say that the romance is not as prominent in this book as it was the X-Hex. I still enjoyed it a lot though. And if you are a YA fan and want to get a little young adult action in, I would recommend A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kimmerer. This book came out several years ago. It's a trilogy that is now complete, and I had a great time reading it. This first book follows Harper, who I believe has cerebral palsy, which is good. I don't know if it's Own Voices rep. I don't personally have cerebral palsy, but I did find the rep to be very intriguing in this book. And she has suddenly got roped into the land of, no, I just saw it, Emberfall. She has been taken to the land of Emberfall to try to break the curse of the land. Prince Rune was cursed many years ago, and he will turn into a beast if he does not find his one true love. This is a Beauty and the Beast reimagining, retelling. I liked book 2 personally better than this first one, but the first one was a great time. I highly recommend this series if you haven't picked it up already. It's fun. It's a good time. It's an easy read. And the last one, which is probably stretching it just a teensy bit, but I'm going to count it anyway, is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. This book, you may be like, Mel, that's not fantasy romance. But it does have a fantasy romance subplot. It may not be there in the whole first book, but it is there. This is a sci-fi dystopian fantasy mashup that I really enjoyed. I will say that the first book can be a little bit confusing. The first little bit is very, very info dumpy, but the series as a whole is quickly becoming one of my favorite series. This is set in a world where clairvoyance or supernatural powers is considered illegal, and people are very, very scared of them. Paige has been found out and has been taken to essentially what is a prison camp because of her clairvoyance. And I don't want to really give a whole lot more away than that, because the series does turn into something very, very different by the end of book 1, the beginning of book 2. But I really enjoyed it. I do think you have to push through the beginning of book 1 to fully appreciate it. Book 1 was like 3 stars for me. Book 2 was 3 or 4 stars, and then we just kept going up, and Mask Falling was one of my favorite books of last year. I will warn you that she writes these very slowly, and I'm not sure when the series is going to be complete, but I'm having a great time. I'm willing to wait as much as it pains me. And then we have 2 honorable mentions because everyone has heard of these, and I didn't want to put them as like my main 10. The first one is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. You guys have heard of this. You know what it's about. War of Two Queens just came out and has caused a big stir amongst the community. But if you don't know what this is about, it follows Poppy, who is the maiden. She is destined to ascend. And in the meantime, she can't be touched. She can't be looked at. She can't even really be talked to. And suddenly she gets a new guard named Hawk, who is going to turn her world on its head and open her eyes to the world that she lives in. And then the last honorable mention is, of course, Sarah J. Maas. Just kind of rope all of her series into this recommendation, but Court of Mist and Fury is one of my favorite books, and the cover is really, really pretty for this edition. It's Nerdy ink, by the way, so I figured I would just go grab it. But Sarah J. Maas writes a pretty predominantly fantasy romance. She's got 3 series out so far. The Throne of Glass series, which I would probably recommend reading first unless you just have not read any Sarah J. Maas and you just kind of want to dip your toe in. And then ACOTAR is my favorite series as a whole. And then her adult series, Crescent City, that is currently coming out. So those are my fantasy romance recommendations. I will be following up this video with my essentially TBR of fantasy romance that I hope to get to. They are mostly indie, so be on the lookout for that coming in the next week or two. I have many that I'm hoping to get to at some point in the near future. But if you enjoyed this video, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button if you liked it. If you just want to let me know that you were here, leave me a dagger or a green heart emoji for BAYLE in the comments, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!